share the screen. Okay, beautiful. Zok to Gemara. So we are about 6, 7 lines down on Daf Samach Amar Aleph, and we're up to Amar Apap. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines down. Last one at lines. Amar Apap. Amar Apap. Oibet Kechavim Adana Yisrael Lakum. What if they're transferring wine from one jug to another jug? So the guy has the dana from which he's pouring in to the kuba that the Yisrael is holding. So that's aser. That would make this wine into yain eser. My time. What's the reasoning? Because kika asi, bikayach ovid kachavim kasi. Clearly, the guy is pouring. That's literally being menasach wine. But Yisrael dana, ovid kachavim akuba. But if they were in the opposite configuration, where the Yisrael was pouring and the guy was just holding the vat that was being poured into, so there, Chamer Shori, there the wine is mutter, because the guy is not doing any pouring. But the mitzadet tzedudi aser. And Rashi has two pshatim in mitzadet tzedudi. Either if the guy shakes it around when it's in his vat, that will be aser, because that makes it into yain ezech, or another pshat Rashi has is if his vat is full, so when he's holding his vat, he can easily put his finger into it. So we're chashu that he'll touch the wine, and therefore it's awesome. Amar Papa, Hi Ovid Kachavim, the Dari Zika, who's holding a flask of wine. So a flask was soft, made out of leather, it was a sealed bag, so to speak, and he was carrying that kosher wine. But Yisrael is watching him so that he can't be pouring it into any other keli. But the flask itself has wine in it, and it's sealed. Mal Yashari. If it's full, then it's going to be mutter. The loy mekarker, because he can't shake around liquid if it's full. It's like a full pushka, doesn't make any noise when you shake it. But chesera, if it's not full, aser dilma mekarkish. Maybe he's shaking he's going to shake the flask so that it should be of a Zara, so that it should, the shaking of the flask would be like shaking it around for a Zara. Kuba malya aser, dilma noga. If it's a full kuba of wine that he's holding, there we're going to be choshed that he might touch it, because if it's full, he could. But because he didn't touch it, so Rashi says, you can't shake it around properly if it's an open keli. Even though when he's walking, it does shake around a little bit. But given the he doesn't really want it to be shaken around. When you're carrying an open bowl of a liquid, you want to stay steady and as smooth as possible because you don't want it to spill out. So therefore, even a little shaking is not a problem. Avol have a karkash v'doima l'meshachshech b'abenesa. But if it's in a flask where it won't spill, there would be a problem. Kazak to Gemara weiter. Ravashi Omar. Ravashi said, "Sika bein malay bein chaser shari." A flask mimonashich is mutter. Why? My time ain't derech nisuch bekaf. Rashi held that the derech of nisuch is not in a sealed flask, but in a full vat. That's where we're choshesh l'negi. Beautiful. Zok the heilige Gemara weiter. Now Rashi tomorrow is going to create a summary of all these halachas. So He's going to go through the last couple of lectures that we learned about Yayin Nesach and give us a summary, which we look forward to learning tomorrow, because we've learned so many details, different ways of nisuch, touching, and all the different ways that the wine becomes usher. Matzarta Zayora, which is a press, but it wasn't a press where they stood on it, where people stepped on it in the vat. Rather, it was a piece of wood that weighed down, that pressed down on the grapes, and the wood was connected to a big screw, and on top of the screw there was a handle. So if you would screw the handle, it would push down. So really, to describe it, would be there was a heavy board that was connected to a screw. The screw went through a frame that had threads in it, and on top of the frame was the handle. So when you twist it, either it would push the whole thing down, or to press on behalf of the. So Zog to Gemara, Matzata Sayara, Rav Papa Shari, Rav Papa holds that if a guy operates it, the wine is mutter. Rav Ashi, Vitemi Rav Simi Barashi, Asar. Now the Gemara wants to qualify the machlokes. Because if the guy was directly pressing down on the bull that was squeezing the grapes, everybody holds if it's koyach of the guy and he's bringing it to the he's on the record board that's squeezing the grapes. He's turning the handle, which turns the screw, which then puts pressure on the board. So that's not direct. Therefore, that's where there'll be a machlokes if that's going to ask the one. But Ikad Amri, there was another opinion. The Amri, the Kayach, when it's such an indirect Kayach, he's only turning the handle on top, which turns the screw, which pushes down on the wooden board. Everybody agrees that's too indirect, and that would not make Yayin Nesach. He pligi, the whole machlokes is v'koychoy. The whole machlokes is if it was a single koyach, meaning if a guy was pressing down on the big board, that was squeezing the grapes. And have a uvda, the koyach koychoy, there was a story where the guy just did koyach koychoy, so the guy indirectly pushed the board down that was squeezing the grapes. The Aser Rabbi Yaakov bin Harpkoy, and Rabbi Yaakov held it was Aser. So the Gemara is bringing a story to show that even Koyach Koychoy was Aser according to Rabbi Yaakov. Ahu Chavisa, there was a jug. The Ifka, it split, but it split. The crack was a vertical crack, so the whole jug was in danger of splitting in half. Let's go to Amud Beis. The Ifka, so the split was vertical, and the two halves were starting to separate. Wine spill out, and it could have popped open. So quickly, a guy jumped, and hugged the jug to squeeze the two sides together. Sharia Rafam Bar Papa. Rafam Bar Papa was matir. It's no longer mutter to drink, but it's not going to be usher no. And Rashi explained the halashik. All he was doing was holding these two pieces together. He didn't shake it. Even though you might consider it indirectly touching the wine through the two halves of the chavis that he pushed together to squeeze the wine, it's not like touching it with a straw. The hasam is shachshech bekana, because there the kana is also shaking it around, which creates the avodah zara. There was no shikshach at all, but he's touching the wine, and he's touching it, of course, for the purpose of saving it. That's why it's only asur b'shtia, but not. It's only asur b'hana, I'm sorry, it's only Asher B'Shtia and not Ba'ana, and that's why they allowed him to sell to him. That's only if the split was vertical and the two halves going to pop apart if he didn't hold it together. So there he's like touching the wine indirectly. What if it was a horizontal crack? So the top half of the barrel is weighing down on the bottom half, and the natural gravity and weight of the top is somewhat sealing that crack. So then I feel b'shtiyah. Then even though the guy is pushing down on the top of the jug to squeeze the crack closed, that's not even usher b'shtiyah. My timer, Maisa Leveinakov. All he's really doing is pushing down one brick on the brick below it, but really the brick is resting on the brick below it. So he's not really doing all that much. And therefore, Rashi says it's like a brick that was on top of the barrel. He's just adding weight to the top of the barrel, but he's not really sealing anything or holding it. There was once a guy, the Ishtakach, he was found, he was found in the press of a Jewish press. What's he doing there? Now, he was in the press, but Rashi says there was no wine in the press. If he was standing in the press and there was wine there, of course, that would be Asher Ba'ana. But there was no wine in it, but there was just residue. There was a residue of wine on the floor of the press that the guy was on. If there's a lot of moisture there, that if you touch it and then you touch something else, you would make that thing wet. The press needs to be kashered because we're afraid that something got absorbed into the wall of the press, and we're going to see a couple of blocks what the kashering process is. That they put water in it, earth, scrub, and then they wash it again. However, below it, but if it was only a little bit of residue, not even that would make his finger wet to be able to touch something else, then just rinsing it out would be enough to get rid of this. Now, the kasha that the Rishonim asked is the last case that we learned, where there was a horizontal crack, even though the guy is pressing down on the top of the barrel jug to seal it, the Rishonim asked, it's pashut. He's really not doing anything at all. So what is the issue? So the Achrayim are masber that what does it say there? The case was Idreyahu Ovid Yachav. He jumped in to save it. Why did he have to jump in for? Maybe he could have just closed it. Why does the Gemara stress that he jumped in quickly to save it? So it must be that they were yeeting around. They were yeeting around, and therefore they could have done it. But the guy jumped to do that. That would be a sign that the guy was actually trying to aser. He jumped in because he was hoping to be able to be meshachshich the wine. That's what he was trying to do. The chiddush is, even if that's what he was trying to do, it doesn't work because all he was doing was putting weight on it, and that wouldn't have constituted a shikshuk that would aser the wine. Zok the heilige Mishnah weiter. Ovid kechavim. Shenimtza oimed b'tzad habor shel yayin. A guy was found in a Jew's property, and he was standing beside an open pit of wine. The question is, do we need to be concerned that the guy touched it and asked Im yesh lo milva alav, if the yid owes the guy money, and Rashi adds that this was also an apoitiki, this was designated as wine with which to pay the guy, also that wine becomes also. But ein lo milva alav, if there's no money owed on this wine, mutter, then it will be mutter. And Rashi explains, im yesh lo alav milva al Yisrael, then it's also liga. The guy won't be afraid to touch the Yid's wine, even if he's caught. Is Savar Amar Limidi, if the Jew complains about that I'm touching his wine, Aminale tenayali b'chayvi. I'll just tell him, you'll pay me with the wine. I'll take the wine. But if the Jew doesn't owe any money on this wine, then the guy wouldn't dare be caught touching it. So even though you saw him standing there, you don't have to be choshed that he touched it. What happens if nafal? What if the guy fell into the bar? And he climbed out. Would that make it usher? Or madadai bikana, or he measured the depth of the wine with a straw stick, or hit us as a tzira bikana, or there was a wasp on top of the surface of the wine, and with a stick he shoot it away. Or if there was a lot of foaming on top of the surface of the wine and he was just pushing the foam down, not touching the wine, but touching the foam, in all these cases, they actually occurred. Each and every one of these cases occurred. Meaning that it's Asr B'Shtia, Mutter Bano. But for Rab Shimon Matter, Rab Shimon said, no, it's Mutter in Gansen. You could even drink that wine. What if not Las Achavis, Vizark? A guy took a barrel, an empty barrel, and he threw it B'Chamasa in anger, Labar. The Bach takes out B'Chamasa. It's not relevant. He just threw it into the bar. Even if he wanted to do it for Avoda Zara, Zaya Maisa, B'Shira, it says kosher. Because as we learned yesterday, into a Jewish that if the Jew owes the guy money, the guy won't be afraid to touch the wine. That's milva al yain. It doesn't just mean that the Jew happens to owe the guy some money somewhere. It means that this wine that we're discussing, where the guy was found standing near, was the designated payment. That if the Jew wouldn't have the money to pay, it would be in a poitiki that the guy would take that wine. So that type of wine is the guy wouldn't be afraid to touch. Amar Rabashi Masnisa Namideka, the Mishnah which we're going to learn tomorrow, is also meduyik that that's the case. That it's only a problem if the guy has a right to this wine as an apoitiki. Only then the guy will not be afraid to touch it. The Tanan we learned. What if a guy owns a press and the Jew wants to have kosher wine there? It's like a hechsher comes in. So they're operating the press. And what the Jew is going to do is the Jew is going to operate the press, create a lot of wine, but he doesn't have the money to pay for the wine. So the Jew would sell the wine bit by bit, take it out of the guy's cellar, the kosher wine, and as he has money to pay for the wine from the product of his sale, he would pay the guy. So and the wine stays in the Rishus of the guy. And the guy, even in advance of getting payment, the guy writes a receipt that I paid already, mutter, that wine will not become usher. The guy won't touch that wine. However, but if the guy says, no, I don't trust you, you can't take the wine out until you pay me in advance, so that means this wine is like the mashkin for the money. This story occurred in Beishan, so the Gemara is medayik. The only reason why we say the wine is usher and we're afraid that the guy touched it is because the guy will not release the wine until he's paid, because money is owed on this wine. If the guy would let the Yid take the wine without paying, even though the Yid still owes the guy money because the Yid has to pay anyway, that would be mutter. So you see, shmamina milval yain ve'inon shmamina. The only time the wine will be usher, if the guy was there with it, is if money was owed on this specific wine. Only then will the guy be comfortable to touch it. But otherwise, we can assume that the guy didn't touch the wine. Gewaltig. A guy fell into the bar and he came out of the bar. Omar Papa, the only time we say the wine is mutter, it's a little bit gross, Ella sha'ala mace. That's if the guy drowned and died in the wine, because then he couldn't have assered it. The fact that he fell in doesn't assert it. Aval alachai, if the guy was able to climb out from the wine, also, you know why? My time of Omer Papa, the dummy aleki Adam. It's like their yomtiv, meaning the guy was able to climb and save himself after he fell into the bar. So as he's climbing out, he's praising his getchke, and he's probably being mishachshach the wine to thank his getchke. So therefore, it would be usher. But if the guy drowned and never made it out, so falling in won't nasser, and he never had a chance to do anything with the wine to asr. Madadu bekana. What if they measured the depth of the wine with some type of rod? So Zok to Gemara, what does the Mishnah say? There's a machlokes if it's aser b'shtia or if mutter in ganzen, like Rab Shimon said. So Amar Avoda bar Ava, Yanuchu loy Rab Shimon brachos al roishay. Rab Shimon zozan gepenched. Why? Because matir afilu b'shtia. When he's matir the wine, he doesn't make a distinction. Mutter ba'ana aser b'shtia. It's either in ganzen mutter or in ganzen aser. Ukeshu aser in the case where Rab Shimon aser aser afilu ba'ana, he aser afilu ba'ana. Amar Abchi Berei Abba Bar Nachmani Amar Abchista Amar Rav Ramila Amar Abchista Amar Zeiri Halachic Rab Shimon. We pass like Rab Shimon in this case in our Mishnah that it's mutter in ganzen the wine. Iked Amar Abchista Amar Abba Bar Chanan Hachi Amar Zeiri Halachic Rab Shimon, but Vein Halachic Rab Shimon. So there's a machlokes we pass like Rab Shimon. Zok to Gemara weiter. Not al chavis v'zarka v'chamasoi lebor. Zel yemaisoi v'chshiri. There was a maisa where a guy was angry and he threw a barrel into the bar. That was mutter. Amar Rav Ashi, Zok Rav Ashi, kol shebezov tamei. Now Rav Ashi is going to use a zov being metama v'maga uv'masa. He's going to use that. He's going to use that to help us understand in a similar case when a goy touched wine, if it would be usher or not. So kol shebezav tamei, v'oivet kechavim oisi yayin esech. Anything that if the goy touched wine in a certain way or any type of liquid in a certain way, it would become tamei, not a liquid, anything. Anything that if a goy would touch it, if a zov would touch it, it would be tamei. If a guy touches Jewish wine in the same fashion, it would be yayin esech. And kol shebezav tar v'oivet kechavim eina oisi yayin esech. And Rashi gives us an explanation. Kol shebezav tamei. So first of all, Rashi tells us loy ari Rav Ashi beheset klal. We're not talking about tumas hesed, which means if you by a zov we know if he touches something indirectly, if he walks on a board and it moves something that's on that same board, it becomes tamei. That would not become also al-tzayin nesach. Rav Ashi is not trying to say that just like a zov could be metama beheset, a goy could make wine also beheset. That's not true. So loy ari Rav Ashi beheset klal el b'maga. Rav Ashi is only talking about a goy who touched wine, and any way a goy touches wine that's similar to the way a zov is metama something, that would be tamei. So what specifically are we referring to? All we want to learn, all Rav Ashi wants to learn from here is if a zov throws something and it hits something else, it will not make that thing tamei. So too, like our Mishnah says, if a guy throws something into Jewish wine, it will not make it also. So and this is what Rav Ashi is saying. Any type of touching that if a zov touched in this manner, he would be metama what he touched. For instance, if he touches something with a stick, he's holding the stick and he touches something, that stick will transmit tumah. But if he throws the stick at something, that stick will not transmit tumah. So if the Zov touched something, bechiburin, bein biyadei, bein bekana, say if he touched it directly, say if he touched something through a kana, that would become tamei. So therefore, she'im ha'ovid kechavim zov, v'yayin. So this gears is not so good. She'im ha'ovid kechavim zov, v'yayin kli adam mitama bezov. If the person was a zov, the gears is not so good. Really, im zov, if a zov touches something, either directly or with his hand, it would become tamei. Therefore, if it was a goy doing this, afa yayin nasa bekach yayin nesach. Kegoyin adam anagei bezov. If someone touches a zov, bein shenoga by a zov mamish. Shy if the zov touched that person directly, bein bekana, or if the zov only touched someone through a stick. So the guy took a stick, the zov took a stick and touched somebody, the person would become tamei. So afa yayin, so too when it comes to yayin nesach, shenoga by ovid kechavim. If a guy touched yayin, he makes it into yayin nesach. Bein biyadoi, bein bekana. Say if he touched the wine directly with his hand. Say if he touched the wine through a stick. Nasa yayin nesach. So Rashi, v'lekal ameimer de Rashi aseit shosov namikoi. As Rashi began with, Rashi is surely not trying to say that just like a zov is matama beheset by moving something indirectly, so too a goy will make yain nesach beheset, because we know that's not true. We just learned on Amar Aleph that zika bein malaya bein chaser shari. Well, the kavasa beheset shazov tamei. If a zov was carrying around a flask of wine, the wine will be fully tamei. Yet we learned on Amar Aleph that if a goy was carrying that flask, it wouldn't become tamei. So you see clearly that a goy will not make yain nesach beheset by moving it indirectly, but if he's touching it there, he will make it tamei. Okay, Zok the Gemara weiter. Eisvei, the Gemara has a kasha on this ruler of Rabashi. Eisvei Rav Huna Rabashi. Not elas achavis v'zarka b'chamasei b'bor. Our Mishnah. Zeh yemaisa b'veishan v'chshirai. But it's masha from the Mishnah. B'chamasei in shloi b'chamasei loi. The fact that it was indirect wouldn't have made a difference. It would have still lasted the wine. The only reason why it didn't answer the wine is because the guy was angry. He wasn't doing it for avoid Zara. He was angry about something, so he threw the barrel into the bar. So Ibazah, you have a raya that if a guy touches something indirectly, it would not answer it. So that's a contradiction to what Rav Ashi said. So turning on to Samach Aleph Amar Aleph. The reason why in our Mishnah it would have been usher, he would have ushered the wine if it wasn't bechamasoi, is because he didn't throw it. He actually was rolling it along. So he was actually touching the barrel as it rolled into the bar of wine. So there was a direct touch through the barrel. And the only reason why I didn't ask for our Mishnah is because it was bechamasoi, and it wasn't for Avodah Zara. But if he threw it and it left his hands and then it landed in the bar, there for sure it would for sure not aser, like Rav Ashi said, because in such a case a zov wouldn't be able to be matama somebody if the thing that he threw touched somebody else later. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zoichet to finish Taf Samach, and Be'ez Hashem tomorrow we will learn Daf Samach Aleph.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.